Hello students, welcome back. Today we're going to start by looking at the exit ticket from yesterday. 75% of you got this question right, that the Gothic architecture started in the 1100s. Gothic architecture uses mostly rounded arches. That's false. It is pointed arches. They are somewhat round, but there is a point at the very top. They are pointed arches. Gothic architecture started in France. The term Gothic was not used during the medieval period. It wasn't like they said, "Oh, let's create a Gothic church." It wasn't that way. They called it modern. Gothic doesn't come. It's not named Gothic until after during the Renaissance. So people in the Middle Ages they didn't call it Gothic architecture. The use of the flying buttresses allowed for Gothic churches to be so high and so airy. Which of the following is a Gothic church? The answer was C, and let's look at the question. C is this one. It can't be B because this one has a dome. Gothic churches don't have domes. It can't be B. There's also a dome in the back, as you can tell. This is ancient Rome, and it can't be C because this one's I think this is the hardest one. It's between A and C. It's not C because it doesn't have a lot of windows. It doesn't have like the spires that are famous in the Gothic churches. I believe this is Romanesque, which is earlier medieval period. The one on D is Santa Maria del Fiore, which was created during the Renaissance. Today we're finishing up Gothic churches or Gothic architecture. We're summarizing, and then we're comparing it to the Renaissance churches or Renaissance architecture. Again, to summarize, Gothic architecture has pointed arches, like this one, has a lot of stained glass, it has these spires, and it has these structures called flying buttresses. Developed in France in the 1100s, 1000 to 1100s, and it became the major style during this time. And this type of architecture is replaced by Renaissance architecture, and that's the main focus today. Renaissance architecture. Remember, you have to remember what they were trying to recreate. They are trying to recreate the classical period. So let's look at some classical structures. Let's look at classical Greece buildings. Okay, so the people of the Renaissance, they are trying to recreate these structures. They are in love with these columns. There's three types of columns you're gonna have to know, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to go into all of them today. But remember, these columns are very, very big in the classical period in Greece. Very popular. They're called columns. There's another one right here. You just saw it. This one. Columns. This is mainly from Greece. The Greeks were really big on columns. The column at the very top, these are called capitals. These are called capitals. This one is an Ionic capital. It's called an Ionic capital. Another Ionic capital. So from ancient Greece, the people of the Renaissance, they are trying to recreate this style. They see it as beautiful, as magnificent. They see the Gothic style as being wild, too much, backwards, kind of. It's a little too much for them. So this is from ancient Greece. Now from ancient Rome, let's look at the other one. From ancient Rome, they have these arches. You see these arches here? I'll zoom into this. These are rounded arches, completely rounded arches. Completely rounded arches. The Romans are also using columns. They're also using columns that they borrow from the Greeks. Here are more. Let's see if I can find more arches. Here are more art. This is the same one. This is the Colosseum in ancient Rome. This is where the gladiators fought. And another big thing about ancient Rome was the use of the dome. The use of the dome. It's kind of like a semicircle. Gothic churches do not have domes. The ancient Romans used the dome. This is St. Peter's Basilica, created during the Renaissance. And here, I'm gonna try to find a better image that shows you the classical influence. I spelled everything here. That's okay. St. Peter's Basilica. So this image, this structure was created in during the Renaissance, and it is a perfect example of classical influence on the Renaissance. I just wanna picture. I don't wanna. Here's a perfect example of classical influence on the Renaissance. Here you have the column. Here you have the arches. You see where the hand is, the arches. And finally, you have the huge, huge dome. So Renaissance architecture is different than the um, than the Gothic architecture. And the Renaissance architecture borrows heavily from the classical period, mainly in the columns, the arches, and the use of the dome. One of the most famous structures created in the Renaissance was Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence. This structure was actually created during the late medieval period. All of this created during the late medieval period, and it wasn't until the Renaissance that Filippo Brunelleschi, the first kind of like Renaissance architect, created or designed this dome. This is one of the largest stone domes in the world today. Um, let's look at. I mentioned the columns before. Uh, Classical columns, and there's different columns. This is Ionic. The middle one is Ionic. This one is, I believe, Doric, and this one is Corinthian. This one is Corinthian. So the people of the Renaissance used these styles in their buildings when creating their buildings. So Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. My dad actually, in our house in Los Angeles, he put these columns in our house, and it looks pretty neat. Again, Renaissance architecture was trying to recreate the classical period. They were heavily influenced by the classical period. They wanted to copy the classical period. They did not admire the the late medieval architecture, and they wanted to move away from it. And the way they moved away from it was by creating something that was completely different. You will continue. So you should have listened to this. There's a video that I want you to watch. There's a couple questions that I want you to answer, and then there's an exit ticket. The exit ticket is mandatory. Please take it. We're gonna finish this tomorrow. You will be assessed on this content, so please take it seriously. Please answer the questions in a complete sentence. I miss you all.